Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be diving into chapters 10 and 11 from the textbook, which is going to be looking at mass communication and media literacy. So let's jump into it. Let's start off this lecture with a fun question. How attached are you to media consumption? And I want you to think about your entire day. How long are you looking at media? And this can include like looking at your cell phone, but also even listening to it. So whether it's the radio in the car, you watching television, how many hours a day are you connected to media? And I guarantee it's going to be a lot higher than you think because we're constantly on our phones, we're always on our laptops, and consistently using media to get work done. So we have a simple definition from the textbook. It says that mass communication is communication occurring between mass media and their audiences. And I want to take you back to the last chapter whenever we were looking at that linear model of communication: source, message, and receiver. And that's kind of where mass communication comes in, is that it kind of follows this linear model. Because if you've ever sat there and yelled at your television, I guarantee the television doesn't care. However, stations get inferential feedback. So how many people tuned in to watch this television show? Or how many people are streaming this song? They don't necessarily know whether you liked it or not. So in a lot of ways, mass communication follows this linear model of communication. And again, going back to that question, how attached are you to media consumption? I have a list right here of lots of different media that you might be using throughout your day. So television, radio, music, internet, video games, newspapers, magazines, books, smartphones, movies. There's so much mass media out there, and our lives revolve around it. So if you want to, take a look at your phone and consider, hey, how long are you spending on certain apps like TikTok? And then even calculate in, how much time are you spending watching television every single day? So if you've looked at your phone, this statistic on this page might not seem like that much of a surprise. Most people spend about 12 hours a day connected to mass media. And I know that people who are content creators are spending even more than that. But what's interesting about mass communication is that mass media determines our values, beliefs, and behaviors. So whether it's us reading a book, reading the newspaper, listening to the news, we're picking up different stories, and those are having an impact on us. And there's a lot of negative impacts that might come to mind. So I know that texting and driving, I always ask my students, how many of you have texted and drove before? And almost everyone's hands go up in the air. I know cars are becoming more smart with Apple Play. Is it Apple Play? Yeah. In our vehicles to help us eliminate texting and driving. But a lot of people still do it. Then you might have even heard people talk about our attention spans dwindling. So we like TikTok and how quickly we move from one topic to another. But even the cuts and the edits in television shows and movies and even in social media are becoming a lot more rapid. And then I guarantee you've probably had conversations with people about cyberbullying online. So there's a lot of negative media effects that you can take into consideration. So ideally, you looked at your phone. How much time are you spending online? And consider that's only one device that you have in front of you. So maybe throughout your day, if you are awake, maybe you're spending 14 to 16 hours connected to media in some type of way. So it's a little jarring. And then whenever you think about that, it's clearly having some type of effect on our lives. There are 4 key ways that mass media is a little bit different than face-to-face communication or interpersonal communication. Number 1 is that these messages are going out to millions of people. So you're not able to like cater a message to a specific person. However, you have to think about a big target audience whenever you're putting together mass media messages. Second, as I mentioned before, companies are getting inferential feedback. So they know that, hey, this amount of people tuned in, but they're not getting the specific feedback necessarily with the messages that they are putting out there. Number 3, once a message is out there, it cannot be changed. And I love this video that I'm going to play for you right now. It's of Miss Teen USA in 2007. She's from South Carolina, and her answer, it lives rent-free in my head. Maybe this is my Roman Empire. So let's take a look at this video.
Recent polls have shown a fifth of Americans can't locate the U.S. on a world map. Why do you think this is?
I personally believe that U.S. Americans are unable to do so because some people out there in our nation don't have maps, and I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere like such as, and I believe that they should, our education over here in the U.S. should help the U.S. Or should help South Africa and should help the Iraq and the Asian countries, so we will be able to build up our future for our children.
Thank you very much, South Carolina.
So after she gave this answer, her video went viral. It was up on YouTube and everyone was mocking her. And even though she went on Good Morning America the next day to re-answer the question and explain like what she was trying to get at, it didn't matter. The message was already out there. So I want you to think about the number of times that you've posted something and then have taken it down. And we have the ability to screenshot things. So very quickly, media can spread. And once the message is out there, there's no taking it back. Last, I want you to think about how television shows and mass media is often formulaic. And the rationale behind that is because people like predictability. If you were to turn on the evening news, it follows the exact same format every single day. But then even some of your favorite reality television shows do the exact same thing. So it's this predictability that people really latch onto, and that's why they keep turning back into the television shows and following that exact same format. Let's consider some of the major effects that mass media has on us. First and foremost, on culture. I have this great quotation from the book that I'm going to read to you. To fully grasp the true influence of media, we must understand mass media as cultural storytellers who shape our ideas, feelings, and thoughts through messages they send, ultimately shaping and defining our realities. I think that this is a great quotation because if we're being bombarded by media all day for 12 plus hours, then clearly it's going to be shaping our culture and also the ways that we think and feel about all the events that are happening in the world. So media is telling us, hey, these are outfits that are cool, that are hip, or hey, here's the topics that are newsworthy. This is what you should be focusing on and having conversations about. So in so many ways, it's defining our realities and impacting our day-to-day lives. Second, this idea of a third person effect. Let's dive into it. The third person effect is the idea that others are affected by media messages, but we are not. We even extend it to our children. Our children are unaffected by harmful content and benefit from good education content, but their children suffer the effects of bad content and reap none of the benefits of the good. So what the third person effect is getting at is that we believe that only other people are impacted by, let's say, advertisements. Like, we're not going to buy that. We're not dumb enough to do that, but other people are. And then whenever we think of people's children, we tend to think, hey, our kids are only getting the good content. But other people's kids, no, they're going to be impacted by all this awful stuff out there. Let's say like violence in video games. So there's a lot to unpack with the third person effect and how our own biases of us being able to say, I'm critical enough not to be impacted by all the things that are put out there by the media. Let's dive into some of the characteristics of media consumption. First and foremost, you might be a platform agnostic. So a platform agnostic is someone who has neutrality in the choice of content delivery technology. And what this means is that they don't care where they get their media content from. So let's hypothetically say that a new song is released. They don't care if they're listening to it on Pandora, on YouTube, on Spotify, or Apple Music. They're just happy to get to listen to that song. However, on the flip side of that, some of us have become very connected to different platforms. I myself, I love Spotify. There's no way I'm switching from Spotify to Apple Music. I have my playlists. I'm set in stone. So in that way, with my music, I'm not necessarily a platform agnostic. So consider, what platforms are you attached to and where are you getting your media and what companies are you loyal to? Second, I want you to think about how much you media multitask. And I'm even doing it right now with my laptop and my cell phone in front of me. But it tells us from the book that 70% of all Americans are on a second screen while watching television. I'm guilty of this all the time. I'm on my cell phone while I'm watching television. So the amount of time that we spend media multitasking is very significant. Next, we have media addiction. So the internet addiction disorder has been added to the psychologist's authoritative list of recognized mental illnesses. What's interesting about this is at one point they were saying that, hey, consumption of media of over 40 hours a week would be media addiction. However, if I kick back and say, oh my gosh, if I'm attached to media for over 12 hours a day, I'm quickly passing that 40-hour mark. So we do have some extreme cases of people who are like sitting in video game cafes for hours on end, who are truly addicted to media. However, I want you to consider in your life, like, are you addicted to media? And what is the bright line for that? What's the threshold to say that someone is addicted to media? Last, the book argues that media can be causing illiteracy. Illiteracy is a loss in thoughtful reading. So we're not able to retain as much information anymore because I can just turn to my phone and ask Siri, hey Siri, give me this information. Who was the 15th president? And Siri can quickly respond. So I'm not having to retain that much information up here, but I do know that I have the technology at the tip of my fingers. So are we skimming? Are we not retaining as much information? I think that's still up for debate. All right, we have two media theories that I'm excited to chat with you about. The first one is George Gerbner's Cultivation theory. And what George Gerbner started off by doing was looking at media in the 1970s. And he noticed that the news stories that they were putting out were not that good. A lot of them dealt with crime that was happening. And it ended up creating this mean world syndrome. He recognized that people who were watching the news started to think of the world as a really dangerous place. And that's what cultivation theory really argues. So I have a great definition here. Media have long-term, gradual, and significant effects because their stories form mainstream society's widely shared conceptions of reality. So what Gerbner argues is that what we see on the news, in television shows, helps shape our realities. And we believe that even though these things are happening in a digital space, they're actually in our real world. So if all we're watching are a ton of crime shows, we might start to think that the world's a really dangerous place and that crime is happening more because of all the crime stories that we're seeing. So I challenge you to think, how do you view the world? And what media gave you that interpretation of that worldview? Second, let's chat about social cognitive theory. And I started off with this question, what television characters do you identify with? And I have students in class jot it down, like, who are you watching and who do you feel like you have some type of connection with as a character? Because what social cognitive theory argues is that people learn or model behaviors by observing them. Modeling can occur as imitation when observed behaviors are directly replicated, and through identification when behaviors are copied to a degree but not replicated. So what Albert Bandura was doing is he started his experiment by having kids playing with a doll. And they would watch an adult play with the doll first. And he started to notice that, like, oh, how the adults played with the doll is how the kids would play with the doll. So then he had an experiment where he had adults go in and it was a big blow up doll and they would punch it. And the kids would start enacting violence against the dolls because they saw and modeled that behavior. Now, this links to mass media because if we're constantly consuming media, then what we see our television characters doing, or even movie characters that we identify with, we'll start to do that in our lives. So whether it's using the same lingo, or whether it's the way that they walk, or maybe even the clothes that they wear, we start to imitate the characters that we see on television and model their behavior. Crazy, right? So this all leads us into chapter 11, dealing with media literacy. And I question you, have you ever taken a course that has got you to think about media and how you can consciously consume different media content? For me, no, I never had a class that taught me about how to use media. And even crazier, we oftentimes just throw iPads or even cell phones into kids' hands and just assume that they know how to use them. So there's three things I think are really important to share with you. Number one, I think we need to remember that media messages are manufactured. Like someone created that. Number two, commercial media are businesses. There are people behind this that are trying to get you hooked and addicted to media consumption. The more you tune in, the more money that company is going to make. And then number three, all media content expresses value messages. That is, it reflects or expresses the values of the content producer. So every single company has a mission. It has values that it is trying to embed within its messages. So when you're consuming it, you're consuming value message material. And that's having an impact on your life. Think back to cultivation theory. You're consuming things, you're believing them to be true and a reality. So be very mindful of what are you consuming and what are the messages that is in that material. So what does it mean to be media literate? Well, let's tune into the definition from the book. The ability to read, interpret, critically assess, and productively use media texts. So we're going to be diving into that in this unit by having you analyze a commercial or a music video. But let's dive into some of the theories that go along with media literacy. The first one is parental mediation theory. And I want you to think back of the number of times that you've seen someone just hand a child an iPad or let them play on a computer or on their cell phone freely. No restriction whatsoever. So what parental mediation theory says is that it stresses the importance of parents taking an active role in managing and regulating children's interactions with media. So we have different layers to this. Number one is active mediation. And what that means is the parents have sat down with the child, are having conversations about what is the media that this child is consuming and what are the messages that the media has, and chatting with the children about this. Number two, thinking about restrictive mediation. So setting time limits on our phones or on our iPads and how much media kids are allowed to watch and play around with. So do any of you actually have like limitations on your phone saying like, hey, I can only have 15 minutes of TikTok? So think about maybe you want to implement that into your life as well. And then this idea of participatory learning and co-learning. So let's say a child is sitting down and watching Peppa Pig. You as the parent are sitting down as well and then having conversations or even pausing the show to talk to the child about, hey, what are you consuming? So I think that this theory is really interesting because I know that many children that I'm around have access to their parents' cell phones and they will sit there and watch TikTok. And they will be flipping through videos nonstop. And oftentimes there is no parental mediation of like, what was the content that you were viewing? What is something that you took away? So there's a lot of media out there, and it's important that we have conversations with kids about the media that they're consuming. Number two, thinking about agenda setting theory. So this is the idea that the media may not always tell us what to think, but they certainly tell us what to think about. And what I would tell you to do is open a new tab, go to a place where you get news. One of my favorite tabs is just yahoo.com. And it's interesting because they have the top 5 stories of the day. Well, how did those become the top 5 stories? So there is someone behind there telling us what to think about. So whether it's Yahoo, MSN, the New York Times, wherever you get your news, even Apple News, someone is putting news stories in an order and telling you what to think about. So you can think whatever you want about that story, but the power of this is that they got you to think about it, even if it's only for a flash second. So one of the things that you're going to be chatting about in our discussion post this week is thinking about marketing to kids. In many countries, there's restrictions on what you can advertise to children. However, in the United States, it is free game. And we call this entire process womb to tomb marketing. So on average, children watch about 25,000 commercials a year. And this marketing industry puts about $17 billion into marketing to kids. That's a lot of money. And a great way of thinking about marketing to kids is a Disney commercial. So I guarantee some of you have probably even gone to Disney World, and they market it the happiest place in the entire world. So kids watch Disney movies, and they even see commercials for Disney World, and they think, oh, I want to have that experience. And then they go and they chat with their parents and say, I want to go to Disney World, or I want to go to Disneyland. So you're getting kids to start asking their parents for things and trying to get these different experiences. Another way to think about this is children's commercials from McDonald's. So if I were to ask you to close your eyes and imagine something from McDonald's, I guarantee you're probably thinking of a hamburger or French fries. But what's interesting about this is all the commercials deal with toys. And these are the ones geared toward kids. So they all have toys as a mechanism to have the kids go, hey, parents, I want to go to McDonald's so that I can get this toy. And even in the commercials, they'll say, you can make your Happy Meal healthy with apple slices. But I guarantee if we're going to McDonald's, chances are we're not going to get the apple slices. I think a few people love them. But more times than not, we're going to be getting a hamburger and French fries. So it's very interesting thinking about, is marketing to children ethical? And should the United States have like some limitations on what is or is not acceptable? Number two, I want you to think about these core principles as you're putting together your activity for this week, looking at a music video or a commercial. Core principles. Number one, audience and authorship. Who made this message? Again, think back to what I said, is that when a message is put out, it's by a corporation or a company or someone who has some type of value message that they're trying to embed in there. So who made this message? Then thinking about the message and meaning. What are they wanting me to take away? So it can be entertaining, but I guarantee there's still a message that they are trying to get you to take away. And then this idea of representation and reality. Is what you're watching representing the real world, or are they creating a fictional reality for you to consider? And are we taking that fictional reality and imposing it on the real world? So some questions I want you to think about. Should we require students to take a media literacy class? And number two, how has media impacted your life? As you think of all the content that you have consumed, whether it's from social media or whether it's from movies and television shows, how has all of this had an impact on your life? So I'm excited to see what you post in the discussion board as well as your activity, and I will catch you in the next unit.